All right. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm so glad to have with us today Bruce Patterson. He's a licensed clinical social worker with over 20 years experience. He specializes in energy psychologies. He's an approved consultant in eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, known as EMDR, a certified focusing trainer and reconnective healing practitioner. And luckily for us, Bruce also provides his services through video sessions. So Bruce, I'm so glad to have you today. And Bruce is able to share with us, some of his experiences of providing EMDR services through video conferencing. And a lot of those that I train, Bruce, that provide EMDR are very interested in it. And many of them have heard of EMDR practitioners who provide services remotely, but most of them by far have not done it themselves, but certainly interested in it. So Bruce, if you can maybe just share with us what got you into EMDR, what interests you in EMDR, and how it's been helpful to you in your practice and your clients.
Sure. Well, shortly after I graduated from my institute, Psychoanalytic Institute, I had a call from one of my favorite teachers. And she said, we had kept in touch. And she said, we have to have lunch. I said, okay. So we met down on 6th Avenue at Sammy's Noodle Shop. And she said, okay, you have to learn 3 new things that we're not taught in the Institute. I said, well, okay, what are those? She said, EMDR, focusing, and EFT, the tapping EFT. And, she was just the best teacher I ever had. So I immediately signed up to learn all 3 of those. Simultaneously. I went through the Focusing Institute. I couldn't wait for EMDR to be offered in Manhattan, where I am. So I flew to Austin to take the first level and all of that. So that's how I got into it. And then after I learned EMDR, I just felt that I was like 70% more effective as a psychotherapist. Yes, you can think of it as another tool in your clinician's toolkit, but it's such a power tool that I started specializing in it, and I became certified and then became an approved consultant, and now I'm a facilitator for excellent EMDR teachers like Gina Colelli here in New York and Laurel Parnell, who teaches all over the world, and I'm on her faculty. So that's how I got interested. I'm always interested in something new that works.
Yes, definitely. Yep, excellent. Yeah, so you found it very, very helpful. I mean, 70% more effective. That's quite a statement. And so I can imagine being on the end of as the client, like that's really important. And clients want us to figure out what's actually going to work for them, what's going to truly be helpful. That's great. And then what about the transition to doing it online? Not transition, but adding the online services. Why is it that you added that on to your the way that you provide services?
Well, it was out of necessity. I had a client who was doing EMDR with me here in Manhattan, and then needed to move back to Texas because of his health, and wanted to keep seeing me, and wanted to do more EMDR long distance. And I just had to figure out on my own, could I do this? Is this possible? And so I sent him an audio CD where the music goes back and forth from one ear to the other. Not fast, because that would drive one crazy. And this is one of the 3 forms of what we call bilateral stimulation, which is the hallmark of EMDR. While you are working on an issue, on a problem, perhaps a traumatic memory, we're asking your conscious awareness to alternate fairly rapidly between one side of the brain and the other. So it can be audio, a headset, music, it could just be sound. Most people seem to prefer either the original eye movement, which is what the EM stands for, right? Or tactile. So you can tap on yourself, but most clinicians end up using these little gadgets we call tappers. So a client holds a little pod in each hand and a little pulse jumps back and forth from one to the other, all of which gets your awareness to go back and forth from one hemisphere of the brain to the other, which seems to be, key to why EMDR works so well. So he moved back to Texas. I sent him one of these, what we call Bilateral Music Cds. He would put it on, and he had a speaker, a separate speaker on either side of his desk. So even though he wasn't wearing headsets, the sound was going from one ear to the other and back, right? If it was like a boom box, it would all be coming from the same area. So it worked well enough, and he was able to continue doing work. Ultimately, I think he found another therapist down there because it's nice to work in person if you can, energetically, but not always necessary, as you yourself know.
Yeah, excellent. And so you had that first client that, it was kind of out of necessity.
Right.
And then you've been providing that more frequently since then. And how has it been helpful to you as a clinician and to your clients?
Well, I like to start using EMDR with someone in person in my office, and then rather than starting purely remotely, never having met them in person. This is preferable to me. So we get the ball rolling, they get the hang of it in person, and then I had a client in New York here who moved to Rome temporarily and wanted to keep doing sessions. So with her, I didn't send a bilateral CD. I had her tap alternatingly on her legs as she was working, and that seemed to work just well for her. She didn't even need one of the gadgets, right? Some clients tap, we call this the butterfly hug.
Right.
As long as it's one side and then the other, back and forth. I have another client who does a lot of flying back and forth to London, and every once in a while we need to do a telemental health session. I use Zoom, and she taps on herself, so she doesn't have any gadgets. She doesn't have the bilateral CD. It can work like that. So just out of necessity, I figured a way to keep doing the work remotely.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. I know some clinicians I've heard have used the rapid eye movement on the screen, but I suppose they would have to have a large monitor for that to be able to actually move, their eyes, not my head, their eyes, on the screen, such as this, right?
I haven't tried that, but with a large enough monitor, I think that can be effective. The main thing is the your awareness has to cross the midline of the body close enough so that it reaches, I think, your peripheral vision, or where it begins anyway, on each side. So if it's just like this, it's not a wide enough.
Sure.
Right. So it has to go back and forth. And of course, the mother of EMDR, Francine Shapiro, still prefers eye movements. This is her bias, but this is how she discovered how to basically jumpstart one's self-healing mechanism. So it just needs the awareness has to go back and forth enough across the midline to do the job.
Right. Yeah. I can imagine if you had a dual monitor or something. I know some clinicians have been concerned about, can you actually monitor one's affect effectively? To see whether or not you have to, do certain things in terms of EMDR, just in case someone's starting to get too worked up in the process. And now there's technology that really helps us with that significantly. I don't know if you heard about this. You probably haven't. Most people haven't. But actually, dermatologists use cameras. It's actually more effective than the naked eye. The camera picks up the very subtle variations in our coloring. So the cameras could actually tell us our pulse. It can actually see our pulse in our face. And
Wow.
it's very subtle different colorations, and it puts like a pinkish color on the face, and you could see it pulse and shift in terms of emotional state. And then it's just biofeedback, right? And you could have a biofeedback device where now with Apple Watches, all those type of things, you have the pulse rate, you could have temperature, all sorts of things that the clinician can view on their end, right?
Right.
And then the cameras are so good now, right? Like you could see me really well, at least my face, and I could actually, I could back up and you could see more of my body. But I know, depending upon the technology on the client's end, the client might not be very good at using technology, might not have the technology available, all of those kind of things. Of course, the clinician can ask the client, like, hey, how are you feeling on a scale from 0 to 10 and so forth. So there certainly could be some limitations with the video conferencing, and then there's some benefits if you have the right technology. But I was wondering what your thoughts are on that, and in terms of the EMDR community around video conferencing for EMDR and being able to monitor one's affect.
Well, I can't really speak for the rest of the EMDR community, but I am pretty hooked into it. What I'd say is staying in touch with what's happening within the client is a big part of the client-centeredness that is another hallmark of EMDR. So after every set or round of bilateral stimulation of whatever variety you're using, we check in, we pause it, it's not continuous, and then we ask what's happening now, what's going on, what are you getting, what's coming up. Sometimes there is a lot of affect, which is to be expected, and it shows, right? Some people have a lot going on inside. I mean, it doesn't show, but it doesn't mean there's not a lot going on inside. And that's why we ask, what's happening now? How was that? What are you getting? And we rely on clients reporting to tell us how they're doing. I like to start doing EMDR with someone in my office so that I can monitor all of that in person and get a sense of how they process, as we say, right? And then once they're remote, I know how they process well enough to know when we need to just slow down a little, back off a little, take a little breather, because that might be needed to titrate the emotion. Generally, if someone's having strong emotions in EMDR, the best thing to do is to keep going, because as upsetting as that emotion might be, another few sets and it will subside just as fast, because EMDR works very fast. But I like to know how this person processes before I work with them remotely. That's why I like to start in the office. I get a sense. I know how they, and everyone processes differently.
Sure.
Very differently. So checking in with the client the whole time, because you can't always see on a screen what you might be able to notice in person. And in EMDR, we sit in this unusual way, which we call hips in the night. So we sit next to the client, but facing the other direction.
Okay.
So, so the client is free associating, if you will, out without looking at the clinician. And yet, if we want to talk to each other, we just turn our heads and we're right there. So you're in each other's energy field, but the point is not to look at each other. And I feel like I'm in the old motorcycle sidecar going along for the ride, without interrupting. I get the ball rolling, and then I kind of make sure I stay out of the way. But if we hit a speed bump, a roadblock, I know what to do to help get over that. So,
okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So, yeah, if we could demonstrate some EMD now, that would be helpful. So, you know, if I was your client, what would the process look like? A very abbreviated process, but
yeah.
just get a sense of what that's like.
Well, I would, if we were working on a new issue, I would, because sometimes you're returning to an issue that you have yet to finish. We call them targets.
Sure. Yeah.
So for starting a new target, I would say, what would you like to work on today? What issue or memory or problem? And then you would give me something.
Okay. Yeah. So let me give you, so like a target, like thinking that something's probably unfinished is, and I don't have a lot of emotion about it, so it's not going to be like a perfect fit, but it'll give us something to work with.
Okay.
When my daughter, I have 4 children. My oldest, my daughter, when she was a really little girl, we were out at dinner at a restaurant one time, and the table, you know, the table has the tablecloth that goes down the table. So she thought the tablecloth going down the sides of the table was something that she could push on. So it was at the point where she could like barely walk, you know, just learn to walk. So she pushes that and she fell and hit her, I think it was her forehead. I don't know if it was her nose. I think it was her forehead. So she got a welt and she was really upset, and I was really upset. I scooped her up and I walked with her. I walked outside of the restaurant. Now this is my first kid, right? So things change a while. They change as you have more kids. I think for me it did, but this is my first kid. So when that happened, I was so upset. My goodness, you know. So I was walking with her and trying to calm her down. So anyway, that's the target. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So that's the target memory, we would say. Okay.
Yeah.
So we always work with a moment from that event which has a lot of emotional charge, which has the power to upset you the most. So if you think of that scene in the restaurant as a scene from a movie, let's freeze the frame at the moment that still upsets you the most when you think of it now. What was the moment that you got to you the most, and even now continues to?
I think probably it was seeing the leg of the table. So when I moved, it was like a curtain, you know, when I moved the tablecloth and I can see what she hit, which was a metal leg of the table. That was it. That was probably it.
Okay, all right. So that would be the image we work with. We always work with a picture. So when you pull up that moment, it can help to close your eyes, but what's ever comfortable, and you see what she hit when you pulled aside the tablecloth. What emotions come up for you even now when you see what she just hit?
So right now, closing my eyes, thinking about it, I don't have much emotion, but when I talk about it, I do.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm not sure where to go with that, but when I talk about it, when I think about the memory,
Yes.
Yeah, I have like a panic that I sense in my gut, like bubbling up towards the solar plex, like
Okay.
a fear.
Yes. Okay. So so you just answered my next question, which is, so you're feeling panic. Where are you feeling in your body? In your gut, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. And so if you stay connected to this moment for a moment, what is this whole thing making you believe about you that's negative?
That I cannot protect my child.
Okay. So let's follow that thread for a second. If that were true, and I'm not saying it is, what's the worst thing that would say about you? I can't protect my child.
Yeah, and it's, for me, it's not personal. It's more existential. It's human. All of us parents, like I parents like, I can't protect my child, like these things could happen.
Okay, all right. So moments like this tend to evoke on a less than conscious level a negative self-belief. So I can't protect my child, that's one of those. Generally, there's a lower common denominator, and the fact that it's never true, it means nothing to the subconscious. So if we took that a step further, it might be, I can't protect my child. I guess, I'm a bad dad or something like that. Anyway, that would be, we're looking for, how did this event make you feel bad about you, right?
Mm.
And so what would you rather believe about yourself rather than I can't protect my child?
That I can comfort my child and help her when things happen that are hurtful or difficult.
Okay, right, which sounds more along the lines of I can protect her enough, right? That's right, as much as any
Yeah.
human can, right? All right, so, and next we take a reading, as it were, on the negative emotional charge, on the upset level, on the distress or disturbance level of that scene. Not then, but now, if you really get in touch with it, pull up that moment, you pull the tablecloth aside and you see what she hit. What's the upset level? If 10 is most upsetting something could be for me, and 0 is totally neutral.
Well, it has shifted from panic and fear in my gut
Mm-hmm.
to compassion, empathy towards her, which is felt more in my like shoulders and upper body, probably 'cause that's where I held her.
Right.
So that feeling of compassion, empathy, and I guess sadness too for her, I would say is at a like a 3.
3. Okay. All right. So, so you've just answered all the questions and what we call the modified protocol for EMDR. There's a standard protocol Francine Shapiro came up with. There's a modified protocol that Laurel Parnell uses, which is basically the same questions we ask in a slightly different order, with 1 or 2 things omitted that aren't always completely essential. So this part in the process, we would add the bilateral stimulation. So I would say, if it's comfortable, close your eyes, go inside, pull up that moment with what you see when you pull aside the tablecloth. Let the thought, I can't protect, my child, be there, and put your awareness in your gut or in your shoulders, wherever you're feeling it the most. And when you have the strongest sense of it, I'm going to ask you to just cross your arms across your chest and alternately tap your upper arms when you have the strongest sense of it.
Okay.
Okay, so go with that, as we say.
When you get the screen to change, I'll talk.
Okay, and if you would just stop tapping and take a nice deep breath and let it go. Yeah. And so what's happening now? What are you noticing?
Well, it's interesting. I truly did not expect this, but I did really notice the emotion, the power of the emotion, definitely went down, for sure. Yeah, it was interesting. I didn't expect it to be so dramatic and apparent for me, but it was. So it went from more of the distress to it went to more of a calm, and I was just kind of looking at the leg of the table. So like, there's I would say if I bring it back to me, the memory, there's still some distress, but it's much calmer.
Yes. Yes. All right.
So,
So this is how EMDR tends to go. This is sort of classic EMDR. So if I ask you to take yourself back to that moment when you pulled aside the tablecloth, we call this going back to target. What you notice most about that moment now?
right now, the thing that pops in my mind is my friends and my wife that were with me, and
Right.
that brings like more emotion than anything so far. And I think it's the love and the care. Like they noticed the love and care that I had for my daughter, and it's almost like they can relate to it and really appreciate it. And knowing that my daughter was in a caring environment. My daughter was, with 4 people that really cared for her.
Yes. So I want you to just think of that, and let's do another set of tapping, bilateral stimulation. Okay, just think of exactly that. Okay. All right, here we go.
Yep.
Okay, if you stop tapping and take a breath, let it go. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do
That
you
was
get?
good. So what came up for me was the I know the counseling terms for me is universality.
Yes.
That they all demonstrated like physically with their eyes and bodies that they understood. Like we've all been there. Like they truly understand what I felt for my daughter. So it was comforting for them thinking about that and remembering. It was comforting that they're saying, hey, like Ray, we understand, it's totally okay, we've been there, we could relate with this, right?
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah. So when you think of the whole event now,
Yeah.
so where would your upset level be, your distress level? 0 to 10 scale, first number that pops into your head.
I would say 2.
2. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And but it's not a singled out emotion. It's a bundle of emotions of uh, care for her, empathy towards her, and the universality and care of the understanding of the community, that I was with. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if we were to keep going, and we could, the point is to get that how much it bothers me reading down to a 0. Okay. At which point I would be asking you, well, do you want to try, or what do you feel like?
I think I think we'll move on. I'll get like a little bit of a break and then.
Yes. Okay. So at this point, so that was the sample. So once we get the how much it's bothering me reading to a 0, then we look into what do you believe about you now when you think of that moment. That's on the positive side of the equation. And when we find a phrase that really fits, like it really feels true in your gut, then we strengthen that by doing a shorter set of bilateral stimulation. Once it feels totally, and we use a slightly different scale. 7 is completely true and 1's completely false. And then we go on to check if there's any discomfort or tension around the event left in your body, right? At first you felt it in your gut. So I would say, hold this new truth statement, which might be, I'm a good father, next to that moment that was so awful for you, and holding those two together, your eyes closed, take a moment and mentally just scan your entire body, head to toe, and tell me where you feel anything. If you feel anything, we do another short set to see where that goes, right? If you felt something positive, like I'm sitting up straight, I feel proud, that I handled it so well, then we would do a short set to strengthen that, okay? If you felt any tension or discomfort left, maybe in your shoulders or in your gut, we do another short set, and that would probably just end up dissolving, okay? And then the last step is to do what we call a future template, which is, I call practicing for the future you want to have, right? You can imagine some future event that might be similarly upsetting, but this time you let the positive belief, I'm a good father, be there. And then tell me when you can picture yourself handling it the way you want to, so you feel good about you. And then you would usually pause and say, oh, okay, I've got it. And then we would do a short set or two until you can picture yourself handling it. And it went really well. And that's how we work. We always do the future last. We practice for the future. It's
I like hearing about the full process, because it's like if you have a wound, it's like I don't know if it's a good analogy, but it's not like you just wash it or whatever. It's like the full healing process. It sounds like you're watching the whole. You're helping facilitate the entire process of healing and integration, rather than doing a piece of it and being done with it.
It's interesting you use that word, because that's the word Francine Shapiro uses, which is that EMDR helps to integrate areas of the brain that are holding pieces of the event, but behind closed doors and not talking to each other. So EMDR helps to link up the memory networks, the neural networks, and it takes the incident from subjective memory, like this terrible thing happened to me, to objective memory, which is, oh, this terrible thing happened and I was there. It's a totally different take on it, but it's the same event.
Right.
You're not taking it personally anymore. It didn't mean you couldn't protect your daughter, you were a bad dad. It just meant these things happen and we handle them best we can, and it sounds like you couldn't have handled it any better, which is something intellectually you probably knew before we started, but when you finish this process, you know it in your gut.
Okay.
And that makes a difference. That really makes a difference. When I said that I felt that EMDR may be 70% more effective as a psychotherapist, one of the reasons is because it works rather fast. And we call the theoretical model the AIP model, the Adaptive Information Processing Model. But that's what Francine calls it now. But initially, I think the A stood for Accelerated Information Processing, because it works so fast. And later on, she said, the fact that it works fast is not the point. The fact is it's adaptive, right? Yeah. So.
Yeah, and you studied also EFT, and EFT is a little different. Do you still practice EFT and
every day?
EFT every day. So do you just kind of integrate the two, or is it kind of two distinct methods of helping that you use?
Yeah. Okay. Like most clinicians, I think I'm not a one-trick pony. I learned something, I like it, I see it working, I use it more, and then I want to learn new things all the time. And then you start integrating them. So when I use EMDR, the language I use is not Francine's language or Laurel's language. I will use my own language, which comes from the world of focusing, because I'm a focusing trainer. Okay.
Yeah, you'll have to explain that to me. I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, focusing is an interesting thing. But EFT and there's two EFTs now, right? There's emotionally focused therapy, which is Sue Johnson's couples therapy work from Canada, and she's amazing. But before there was her EFT, there was emotional freedom technique, which is
tapping. Yeah.
Yeah, the meridian tapping technique,
Yeah.
which is the one size fits all spin-off of thought field therapy, or TFT, which was created by Dr. Roger Callahan out in California, who was a terrific psychologist who got to a point in his practice where he was so frustrated with himself over clients that weren't making enough progress that he said he felt guilty taking their money, and he had to do something. And out of desperation, having started to study the rudiments of traditional Chinese medicine, he would have them, think about something was bothering them and then tap on particular meridian points, and it helped.
Oh.
So EFT is the one size fits all version of TFT. And EFT became much more famous and popular because of Gary Craig, who was Roger Callahan's.
And how do you? What's the abbreviation for that? Is it TH?
TFT stands for Thought Field Therapy.
So is it
TFT?
TFT, yeah, three letters. TFT
is Thought Field Therapy.
I see.
And then the spin-off is EFT, which is emotional freedom technique. Yeah. Very California.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I see. Okay. And back to so how do you decide which one to use? Or do you use them as two separate modalities, or?
I use them separately, but now I use them interchangeably. If I don't have a lot of time left in the session, I might opt to use EFT because the client is guaranteed to get some relief before he or she leaves my office, right? Or before the session is over. One can do it, remotely as well. And the way I've come to do it is I will set up an EFT session the same way I do an EMDR session. I will use the EMDR protocol for an EFT session and call it a target. And that way, if we don't have a lot of time left and we start with EFT, and the client comes back the next week and we have the full session, we might switch to EMDR and work on the same target issue, because I've set it up like an EMDR target. And I know just where we left off, just where we're picking it up. And that's the structure of EMDR, which some people find daunting and awkward, but I find really comforting, the way a cat loves to get in a box. Structure is comforting for me.
Okay, that's a great analogy. I like that. Yeah, excellent. Okay, yeah, so, if there's EMDR practitioners who want to begin using or providing their services virtually through video and phone, knowing what you know about that and having taken training, what would you recommend? Like, how would they branch out into providing it in that way?
Well, I would, my personal recommendation is to start off with the client in your office, and do some EMDR in the office, and then if they have to move away or be in another state on business, make sure wherever they are, you are licensed. Okay, that's important. That's and that you can continue the work. You can even continue a session you started in person remotely. It's not hard to do. And if the client is comfortable doing it with you, they'll be comfortable doing it with you remotely, because it'll feel familiar. It's like, oh yeah, we've done this. I remember I can do this. Having them switch from mechanical bilateral stimulation, which we might use in the office, to self-tapping won't be a big stretch, because when we're doing the preparatory work for EMDR, we can do self-tapping to strengthen internal resources that they don't even know are there, like confidence, and pride and that sort of thing. So it won't be this foreign thing that you're trying to start with remotely for the first time. That's my recommendation, but you don't have to do what I do. That's just what I do.
Yeah, that's certainly helpful. And you have a website where you have some resources available for people. Is that right? So this is your website.
Yes,
And,
that's right.
I like the word that you have here. Renewal. Am I saying that right?
I call it renewal, like renewal.
Yeah.
Like, it's like renew. You can renew yourself every day, right? So renewal.
Yeah, a state or process of being renewed from within.
Right.
I like that. So on your website here, you mentioned that you have some resources. Like I see, you have the media page.
Yes.
You have some videos.
I
That
have
people
some
can watch.
videos, which are also up on YouTube. These are freebies, I guess. If someone is having trouble with anxiety, there's something energetically they can do on their own, which is safe and free, that can really reduce their level of anxiety in the moment. It's very empowering to try this stuff and realize, whoa, this works. Like, I don't have to be the prisoner of my own, anxiety. And I have one called When Breathing is Healing. So there's coherent breathing is a slower, deeper kind of breathing, which is much healthier. And of course is better, not just for your body, but for your mood and your outlook, which can, shift if you're in a bad place. So eventually I'll have 6 little mini videos up there. One is, intro to energy psychology, because even a lot of psychotherapists don't understand what energy psychology is. Yeah, so there'll be a few new ones coming out. One's called How to Handle Overwhelm, How to Take Good News Personally, and what's the last one? Oh, when is therapy a good idea?
Okay, there you go.
Yeah,
I like
that's
that
coming
one.
out soon.
Very helpful. Yeah, and then the resources page.
Yes, well, I have things that I call energy corrections, quick, short things you can do to pull yourself back into the moment if something has pulled you out of it. Perhaps you got triggered. Perhaps your boss yelled at you and it's knocked you out of balance. So there are quick, short things you can do to pull yourself back to center, to your personal center. Pull yourself back in the moment, where it's really hard to stay upset because you're grounded and centered. We say, literally physically in the center of your biofield, or what they used to call your aura. It's very hard to be thrown when you're back in that place.
Yeah, excellent. Yep, and then you have links and resources.
Yes. There are some of my favorite books are up here, and they're for the lay public. They're not for clinicians.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. Excellent. Well, yeah, I really appreciate you spending this time with us and being able to get a demo and hear from a clinician who's been doing this for a long time, how it all works, how it's helpful, and how to get started. So thank you very much and greatly appreciate it.
Well, you're very welcome. Nice talking to you, Ray.